his son Isaac, Isaac's son Jacob, and tonight we're going to talk about Jacob's son Judah. Now, I know forgive me. Try turning that back on. I know it actually starts with talking about Joseph in chapter 37 of Genesis, but then we have chapter 38. So a short little story of Judah appears in chapter 38. So I thought we'd go ahead and deal with Judah instead of interrupting ourselves or having to go back at the end and talk about him after talking about Joseph. Because Judah is very important. Because even though basically chapter 37 through 50 is dealing with the life of Joseph, who is a very important character, I'm just getting that. He's not part of that promise. He's not part of the seed line of Christ, where Judah is. So tonight, I want to stop and I want to look at Judah. Now, we're obviously going to have to talk about Joseph a bit because Judah plays in that. But then we're going to spend most of our time in the middle section on chapter 38 talking about Judah with Tamar. So that's the way I've decided to, that's the way I've decided to look at Judah's life. We're going to consider Judah and Joseph, Judah and Tamar, and then Judah and Jacob. If you'd like to turn in your Bibles to chapter 37. Judah was born of Leah. You remember the situation Jacob got into with Leah and Rachel, and Leah had 4 children before she stopped bearing. And in chapter 29 and verse 35, we read that Judah was born of Leah, the last of the 4 before she stopped having children, at least for a while. We had Reuben, bingo, thank you. We had Reuben, we had Simeon and Levi, and then we had Judah. So what's the situation that we find first off with Judah? We find that there's that problem that we talked about with Jacob with regards of favoritism toward his sons. Here we have Joseph coming on the scene, right, in chapter 37. And what's the situation? Well, the situation is he's the favorite of his father. Okay, he's the 11th son. And it says that he's the favorite because he was the son of Jacob's old age. And I'm not going to say the Bible's not telling the truth. I think that is partially it. But don't you think it has something to do with who his mama was too? The only child up to this time of his favorite wife, Rachel. And again, the issue with polygamy just rears its ugly head and always causes problems. So Joseph is the favorite son. He's the younger one. The other sons are out working hard in the field. The younger son gets used by the father as kind of a spy, a report to go check on the brothers, make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. That's always popular work, right? He gets the fancy coat of many colors, and the brothers are out sweating in the field, and here he shows up. And then, to make matters worse, he starts having these dreams. And you got to bless his heart, right? I mean, self-preservation didn't seem to be really high on his list because he's like, hey, brothers, I had a great dream last night. We all had sheaves, and we were all picking sheaves, and all your sheaves bowed down to my sheaf. Yeah, keep talking. And then he goes and he says, oh, I had another dream. The sun and the moon, mother and father, and all these stars, they came and they bowed down before me. That's it. So what happens? His dad sends him out near the fields of Shechem where they're taking care of the animals, and the brothers see him coming, and they're just like, that's it. Let's finish him. Let's kill him. And we read that Reuben says, shed no blood, but put him in one of these holes. And you think, good on Reuben, right? Stepping up with brotherly love. not so much. Reuben was scheming a way to get back into Jacob's good graces. Why? What happened in chapter 35 of Genesis? Reuben lay with his father's concubine, his father's wife's handmaiden. Again, it's just icky. Maid Bilhah. That's why he didn't get the firstborn blessing. And so he's trying to scam the system. I don't know how he's planning on working this. They all planned on throwing him in a pit, and somehow he's going to bring him back and say, I saved him, even though I don't know, but he was scheming. And so they're waiting there, and they think they're still going to kill him, the rest of the brothers, but he simply said, shed no blood. We're going to throw him in a pit. There's no water. He's going to die. It's going to be a terrible death, 4 or 5 days without water in a hot hole. But then Judah steps on the scene. Chapter 37, 26 through 28. So Judah said to his brothers, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Because remember, Reuben had said, shed no blood. He says, come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brothers listened. The Midianite traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. Like with his father, if you close one eye and squint the other eye, Judah did kind of a good thing. They were going to kill him in his mind, and he says, let's not kill him. Let's make some money off of him and sell him into slavery. But in theory, it's better than killing him, right? So that's our first glance, and it's this first relationship, Judah and Joseph. And again, this is our hero, brethren. This is the one through whom the Christ is going to come. This is the one. Jews were proud of being the descendants of Abraham, right? The Jews called themselves Israel, the nation of Israel, after Jacob, who was Israel. Yet, where did the name Jew come from? It came from Judea, which came from Judah, which was named after Judah, this guy. Their very name, salvation is of the Jews of the Judah ancestors. Okay? I know he wasn't talking about Judah ancestors, but Judah came to represent all Jews. That's where the name came from. So he's a big, important fellow, and we can honestly say he didn't start off great, but there it is. Now turn to chapter 38. Now let's talk about Judah and Tamar. Judah left the highlands of Hebron and went down northwest to an area called Adullam. And in Adullam, he saw a woman that he fancied, and he married her, and she was a Canaanite. Okay? If you're a Bible student, I saw you make the face. Thank you. Absolutely. A flag show going up. What's he doing marrying a Canaanite? Where did Abraham send Isaac? Where did Isaac send Jacob? And why? Yet he marries a Canaanite, the daughter of a man named Shua. She bore 3 sons for him. The oldest was the second was Onan, and then Shelah, which is really strange. If you know Australia too, it gets even weirder. But so there's the 3 sons that he has. Well, his son grows up, and Judah finds, we presume, a Canaanite wife for his son and her name is Tamar. And they get married. But God kills The text says God killed him because he was wicked. And again, as Bible students, we stop and go, I wonder what might have contributed to being wicked. What was his mother? A Canaanite. So who's his mother worshiping and how? Yeah, maybe. But that's the situation. So now Tamar is a widow. So Judah goes to his second son Onan and then says, you must take your brother's wife Tamar and you must basically give her a son to continue the line of This is a kind of a preview. It must have been something that was pretty common. We don't hear it being from God yet. It is a part of the law of Moses. But we see it here that the younger brother helps the older brother who's passed away by giving him a child, that his line may continue. So Onan takes Tamar. But Onan didn't fall far from that tree either. He's wicked. He's happy to take Tamar to his bed, but he doesn't want to give seed to his brother. And so he lays in such a way that that doesn't happen. Okay? God sees that, and God kills him because of his wickedness. So now Judah looks at Tamar, looks at his only remaining son Shelah, and says, I'm not going to give you to my son Shelah until he's grown up. Now, I don't think he's being totally dishonest. He may have been a little young for it, but it's very clear from the text he did not want to give her to his son because he's thinking, once bitten, twice bitten. As the great theologian B. Brown said, this girl is poison, right? He's trying to keep her away from his son. So basically, he's committed her to being a widow all the days of her life. And then the story turns icky, as if that wasn't. So Tamar is figuring out now that he has no intention of giving her a husband to continue her line. So she's going to try and do something about this. She puts off her widow clothes. She hears that Judah is going to go down to the sheep to engage in shearing of the sheep. So she knows the path he's going to take. So instead of with her widow clothes, she puts on the clothes of a cult harlot, a prostitute, and waits on the path for him to pass by. Our hero, Judah, walks by, sees her, and says, yes, please. And so he goes to her and he says, I will give you a young goat from the flock. And he obviously doesn't have a young goat with him, so she asks of him a pledge, something to give in promise of the payment of the young goat. She asks for his signet, that would be his signet ring, and the cord that it comes upon, and his staff. He gives it, he lays with her, and he goes on. Well, then what happened? Well, he got to where he was going, and he got one of his servants, and he said, there's a lady up there on the road. If you could take this goat to her, again, it's our hero. Take this goat to her, that'd be great. Servant goes up there with the goat. She's not there anymore. She has gone home. So Judah goes, well, I tried. She can have the ring, I guess. No big deal. About 3 months goes by. Tamar is found in the tents of Judah to be pregnant. Judah is angry with this and calls for her to be brought out of the tents and to be burned alive. There are several passages, we see that in the law, of certain penalties for harlotry among the priesthood. That was one of the punishments. But that's what he says. This is what's going to be done. And as they're dragging her out, she produces his ring. And Judah has a change of mind. Notice Judah. Again, say what you want, but notice Judah, what he says in chapter 38, verse 26. So Judah acknowledged them, the signet ring, the cord, and the staff. How could he not? And he said, she, Tamar, has been more righteous than I, because I did not give her to Shelah, my son. And he never knew her again. He repented. He owned what he had done. All of it. And he confessed it. Good on him. Yes? Here's one of the most amazing things. Matthew chapter 1, verse 3. Our Lord and Savior came through this incident. He came through Perez, who was begotten by Judah, by Tamar. The first sermon I ever preached was 5 women in the Bible. And it's the 5 women in the Bible that the 5 women that are mentioned in the genealogy of Christ. Do you remember who they are? Rahab, Bathsheba, Tamar. I'm not doing them in order. Tamar, I'm probably going to forget one now. None of them, if you were making up a story, none of them would be ones you would include in a genealogy. And yet, God did, showing what he can do, working with the flawed tools that we are. So there's Judah and Tamar. Let's conclude. Don't get your hopes up. It's a long one. Judah and Jacob. So what happened? Time goes by. We leave Judah and Tamar, and the rest is the story of Joseph, of which Judah plays a part here and there. So the situation is, as time goes by, there is famine in Canaan, and they are going to have to go to Egypt to get food. We know the rest of the story, that it is because of Joseph that they have food in Egypt. So they have to leave famine in order to go get food in Egypt. Brethren, notice the reoccurring theme? Abraham had to leave to go into Egypt because of famine. Isaac was going to leave Canaan and go to Egypt because of famine, but he was told not to by God. Instead, he went to Gerar of the Philistines. But here again, there's famine. So the 10 sons are sent to Egypt to get food. They go there. They don't recognize Joseph as the man in second place in charge of the food distribution. He recognizes them, obviously. And he's trying to test them. He asks about them, and he finds out that there is another son. I couldn't find a place where it said that it was another son of Rachel, but he at least knows there's another son. And he wants to know if his brothers have changed. What are they like? So he kind of does a little scheme with them. He kind of makes it look like they stole. He thinks he's accusing them of being spies in the land. And they're like, we're not spies, we're just here for food. And he says, bring me your youngest brother and I'll believe you. Okay? And in chapter 43, verse 3, Judah spoke to him and said this. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, brethren. Forgive myself. Forgive me. So they went down to Egypt, they did that, and basically it got to the point where Joseph said, I'm going to let you go and get your youngest brother and bring him back to me and prove to me that you are not spies, but I'm going to hold one of your brothers, Simeon, until you get back. He's going to be my prisoner until you come back. Okay? Look at chapter 43. Chapter 43 and verse 1. Now the famine was severe in the land, and it came to pass when they had eaten up the grain which they had brought from Egypt, that their father said to them, go back, buy us a little food. What about Simeon? Right? He's still in Egypt. They came back. They got the little food that they were allowed to take. They're supposed to come back with the youngest son. And the next thing we hear is, hey, we're out of food. We should go back to Egypt. And there's Simeon going, what about me? Kind of interesting. So Jacob says, go get some food. Finally, Judah says, we can't. We can't go back. Why not? Verse 3. Judah spoke to Jacob, saying, the man, Joseph, solemnly warned us, saying, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you, Benjamin. Verses 8 and 9. Then Judah said to Israel his father, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you and also our little ones. I myself will be surety for him. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. Because Jacob said, no, I've lost one. I'm not going to lose my other. Not going to happen. Look at the words of Judah. This is a different Judah, isn't it? This is a man saying, this is life and death, Dad. Put it on me. I'll take that responsibility. It's on me to make this happen. What happens? They go back to Egypt. They go there. Simeon gets released. You can just kind of see him going. It's just an interesting thing that poor little Simeon seems to have been lost in the shuffle. But they meet with Joseph again. Joseph gets to meet Benjamin. He's so happy, but he's still trying to see his brothers. Who are they? Have they changed? Are the same people that did that horrible deed to him? So he played that little trick. You remember he put the silver cup in Benjamin's bag, and he said, you guys were trying to steal. And no, we weren't. If one of us stole them, he can be your prisoner. And there it is in Benjamin's bag. Oh, man. What are they going to do? Well, the brothers that dealt with Joseph, what would they have done? Bye. Good luck. Look at Judah in chapter 44, 30 through 34. Judah has a heart-to-heart with Joseph. He doesn't know it's Joseph yet, but he says, "Now therefore, when I come to your servant my father, and this lad is not with us," if we go back and you still have Benjamin, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, it will happen when he sees that the lad is not with us, that he will die. So your servants will bring down the gray hair of your servant our father with sorrow to the grave. For your servant became surety for the lad to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father. Now therefore, please let your servant remain. Let me stay, Judah said, instead of the lad, as a slave to my lord, and let the lad go up with his brothers. For how shall I go to my father if the lad is not with me? Lest perhaps I see the evil that would come upon my father. Judah, attaboy. He steps up and he says, take me instead. Wonderful growth in the character of Judah. Joseph sees the change, reveals himself. All is good. Eventually, instead of keep giving them food, he encourages them all to come to Egypt, and they get that land over in the delta area of Goshen. And that's where they dwell until the next time we hear of them leaving. But we're not done with Judah and Jacob. The last thing we have with regards to Judah in our book of Genesis has to do with the blessings of Jacob in chapter 49. He blesses all of his sons in order. And in chapter 49, verse 8, he begins. 8 through 12 is the blessings of Judah. Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. Remember, he was the fourth born. But because Reuben lay with his father's concubine, he did not receive the blessing. Because Simeon and Levi had done that wickedness at Shechem, they did not receive the blessing. Judah received the blessing. And after what we just saw in the growing in the character of Judah, he is the man for this job. The blessing goes on. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who shall rouse him? The concept is Judah is like a young lion who rises from eating. He's killed, he's eaten, he's risen up, he's going out back to his place out in the sun. He has lied down in the sun, and who's going to mess with him? Nobody's going to mess with him. The scepter, the symbol of rule and authority, shall not depart from Judah. That's part of the blessing of verse 8. Nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. And the best definition I've heard of Shiloh is it means he whose it is. That's what Shiloh is. Judah will have the rule until the one who really has the rule comes. And then there's these last parts, and translators haven't done a great job always with them. Binding his donkey to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. Okay. He washed his garments in wine and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are, New King James and most of the newer translations do a terrible job, I believe. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth are whiter than milk. Let me explain my understanding of this, and then why I think some of the older translations did a better job. What is this all about? Well, he's a lion. Okay, I get that. He's, the Lion of Judah. I get all that. He's going to be the one in authority. Yeah, the lawgiver. You betcha. He ties his donkey to the vine. Okay. I don't know where else you'd tie your donkey, I guess. What he's describing is prosperity. Judah is going to prosper. His donkey is going to be tied to the vines, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He's got donkeys, he's got colts of donkeys, he's got vines, he's got choice vines. He washes his garments in wine. What does that mean? He's got grape juice to spare. His cup overfloweth is what that means. His clothes in the blood of grapes. And I think the Old King James and a couple of the other ASV, his eyes are darker with wine, are red with wine. And his teeth are white with milk. It's not talking about that he's got red eyes. Again, it's simply saying that he is prosperous. So much so that his eyes are the color of grape juice and his teeth are white because of all the milk he's drinking. Right? Prosperity. The blessing of Judah. Authority and prosperity. Judah. Not a great character, again. But we focus on progress, brethren. Growth. Not on perfection. Not even nobility at times at the life. But when you look at Jacob, his father, looks like Judah stepped up a bit, didn't he? He kind of went from a schemer, maybe trying to save his brother's life, maybe just trying to make some coin. But he went from that to, I'm the surety, Father, it's on me, and to Joseph saying, I'll be the slave instead of him. Take my life instead of his, which then you start getting into the type and shadows of his descendant, the Christ, right? From weak to being strong of character. Maybe not really faith, but at least family, loyalty. Many lessons there. Turn to Hebrews chapter 11. Again, we shouldn't rush to judge Old Testament characters with our New Testament understanding, which is from the New Testament revelation. Because what did they know and what did they really understand? What we look for is progress. What we look for is people trying to, here's the world and here's God, and they were somewhere in here, and we want to see that they were moving that way toward God and not the world. Because look at Hebrews 11 and verse 32, right? The great hall of faith. And, we have Abraham, hoorah. We have Noah, hoorah. We have Abel, hoorah. And Abraham, well, he's just cat's meow. And then look at verse 32. And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon, the guy that made the ephod and caused Israel to sin by worshiping the ephod with his 70 sons. And Barak, remember Barak, the mighty soldier who said to the prophetess Deborah, I'm not going to go to the battle unless you go with me. Who else? Or Samson. Wow. Right? Well, he killed a lot of Philistines. Jephthah. With the daughter and whatever happened there. David and Samuel, okay, we can do that in prophets, but brethren, in all of these men, they're not there by accident. When you look at their lives, when you step back and you look at Gideon and the world that he lived in the time of Judges, his steps, were they toward the world or were they toward God? They were toward God. He had faith. And he demonstrated that faith, and he saved Israel with that faith. Even though we look at it and go, kinda, yeah. And maybe he stumbled a little bit at the end, but in general, his direction was that way. Same thing with all of these. With Barak, he went and fought, and he got her done. Samson, at the end, what did he do? He said, let me die with the Philistines. And with that one act, he killed more Philistines than he had in his whole life. What was his job? To deliver Israel from the Philistines. And he did it. Working with God now and then. But he did it. Same thing here with Judah. Was he perfect? No. Are we perfect? No. Was he progressing? I think we can definitely see more progress with him than we could with his father Jacob. And that's what's with us. And here's the lesson we take. We have to watch our extremes. We should take comfort that God looks at these people's lives that we just talked about and says, faithful. We should take comfort that God looks upon the life of David that I hope you have studied, and he says, this guy never betrayed me but one single time. And you're like, I can think of a couple others, God. God says, no, his heart was always mine, except for that one time. And then he even got over that. That should encourage us. Make us feel. Now, does that make us say, okay, I'm good enough? No, because to whom much is given, much more is expected. And brethren, we are blessed with this New Testament, which tells us about the fulfillment of all that promise. We have the Christ revealed. We have the life demanded, revealed, and modeled for us. And he stands in heaven and he calls us to come to him. To whom much is given, much more is expected. Brethren, let us stand up. Progress every day unto Christ's likeness. Never content with the world. If you're not a Christian this evening, God calls to you. He desires that you be saved and your sin problem be done away with. He's provided the way. You must hear the truth. You must believe it. You must repent of your sins. You must confess Jesus as Lord and Christ. And then you must obey him. Be baptized for the remission of sin. And then you must walk daily, closer to him, daily, until the end. If you haven't done that, haven't started that walk, why not this evening? If we can help you, we'd love to. Christians, don't be distracted. Don't become complacent. Don't get discouraged. Keep on keeping on, focusing on Jesus. Put aside the weight and sin. Don't let it entangle you. Strive unto glory. If we can help you in anything, we'd ask that you come as together we stand and sing.